Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. And today, as usual, we're having a Safa Sunday.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Book 101 Review. My name is Sapha Burnell. I am a best selling cyberpunk and mythpunk author. I'm also an editor who works for a small press, and so we're going to be talking about books today. And I'm very excited because I love books. I love writing them. I love it when people read my books, and I love sharing books that I believe everyone should read.
Yes, we love books, people. And we have a big announcement. Big announcement. We're changing Safa Sunday to Saturday. How's that, Miss Bernal?
Yes! I love it. I love the idea of Safa Saturday. So we still get Safa
Yes,
in a
we still
week,
have Safa.
but we are going to be switching to Saturday afternoons instead of Sunday mornings. So my sleep schedule loves it. um, but also, it is going to mean that we will be primed and ready every Saturday afternoon for Movies 101 review and for Book 101 review. And it's going to be a good time. I'm really
Yes,
looking
that will
forward to
be
it.
a great time. Book 101 review for Safa Sunday make us bigger, better, and bolder.
Yeah.
And what the other one, Miss Bernal? Supernatural. What else? What you said a while ago?
Oh my gosh. Getting those.
Good news, yes. So, Miss Bernal, today, this is the last week of the month. Yes, last week of the
Yes.
month. So fast, it's September already. So, what we gonna talk
Oh,
about?
we are going to close off talking about thrillers today with some of the best psychological and action thrillers that have been done in book form. Things like The Da Vinci Code, The Bourne Identity, The Silence of the Lambs, Gone Girl, and Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson. There's so many good books to
Yes.
go on to, and there's so many good books to kind of get the sense of when it comes to both psychological and action thrillers. Action thrillers more like The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum, psychological thrillers more like The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, and it's just let's finish off with a bang, a whimper, and the desire to go read T.S. Eliot's poetry at the end.
Yes, I don't believe that Silence of the Lamb wrote by Thomas Harris for 10 years. Don't you think?
Yeah.
And then become one of the biggest movies
Yeah.
of all time.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and you never know when you write a book, you never know when it's going to hit, its groove. And I've been going through this a lot lately with the small press and things like that. You can have the best book ever written, and if it doesn't hit at the right time, then it's not going to get the expression of readership that it rightfully deserves. Nor is it necessarily going to get, that adaptation or that film or that TV show or whatever it is. It might not come right away. And for something like Silence of the Lambs, I mean, it was 1991 by the time that got its day in the sun. And then it sort of shifted almost everything. Yes, we had psychological thrillers before The Silence of the Lambs. There's a lot of psychological thrillers in the 70s that were absolute mind games, especially in
Yes.
the 70s, going into the 80s too, because with the 70s, you've got this push towards a rating system and towards what is and is not allowable, both in comic books and in films and the whole thing. And so psychological thrillers were a way to get that sort of creepy horror sort of titivating experience of being scared and being, it's kind of stuck into this really weird, dark situation, something that a lot of people did not necessarily have in their lives in North America at the time, when, culture was a little bit less, dour in certain ways. Um, and yet they were able to kind of get around that without just doing like body horror and schlock and just random acts of violence. Not to say that those things didn't go on, but just that you get that kind of system and culture where whatever somebody doesn't have in their lives is usually what they're looking for in some form of media, like a book. So,
So, Miss Bernal, how do thriller novels reflect societal fears and anxieties?
it shows us what we're scared of. Are we scared of a parent kidnapping small children, like in Prisoners? Are we scared of, what's more terrifying than a human who turns themselves onto another human, like in The Silence of the Lambs with Cannibal Lecter, who's a cannibal?
Yes.
I just said Cannibal Lecter for, you know, it's Hannibal, but
Animal.
I said that for comedic effect and but up ching. But
The
you
effect.
up, but you get that sense of fear, that sense that this character played, written by Thomas Harris, that he's not looking at fellow humans as human. He's looking at fellow humans as a snack, as a meal, as, are you worthy of being human, or are you livestock? And I think especially in 1991 when the film came out, but even before that, like, I think when you're reading Harris's work and you're getting that sense that these serial killers that we're getting in these psychological thriller movies, they don't view people as people. At a time in our culture where there was just the beginning of an existential crisis, which is still going on to this day, of what are we here for? What is the meaning of our lives? Do we even matter? And when you as a culture are dealing with the ideas that maybe the religions that were guiding our lives for hundreds, if not thousands of years, maybe they may or may not be correct. What do we actually think? Do we believe there is a God? Do we believe there are certain things? Do our lives matter? And then you have these psychological villains who are looking at you like livestock, not like a
Tonight.
person. And it's like, oh, how do you make your life matter? How do you make it onto the person list? And I think that sort of thing it started growing, and then there are certain places where it continues growing and things like that. But I think, especially with the Da Vinci Code, we're dealing with all of the things. At the time Dan Brown was writing it, we were dealing with a lot of drama, and I don't say drama as a lightly, when it comes to what was going on in the Roman Catholic Church, when it comes to certain acts that certain priests and people in trusted positions were doing to people who very much were vulnerable, in the negative. We've got all of these things going on. Our faith in the Catholic Church is being shaken. We see them as this billionaire conglomerate with power, prestige all over the world, with different rules applying to them than apply to others. And then you have the Da Vinci Code, where Dan Brown goes, yes, that's because they aren't about, the message of Jesus Christ, which is love God, love your neighbor as yourself. They're actually this conspiratorial organization that's attempting to control parts of the world. And so during those moments of being shaken, you get something like the Da Vinci Code, which further shakes. And it's fascinating to me with something like the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, how people will they'll actually go to the places that they, especially that they saw in the movie, and
Yes.
be like, well, where is it? Where is it? Where's the secret room? I want to see it. I want to see it. And it's like, dude, that was a fictional
Fiction.
story.
It's really
There's no
controversial.
evidence that Jesus married Mary Magdalene and had a bunch of kids. That's oh, but what about the Gnostic Gospels? Well, slow your roll there. We don't have evidence for that. We barely have evidence that Jesus existed, let alone who he's married to. Although I got into that in a few of my poems in Usurper Kings. So um
Yes.
interesting thing that. But you see that right on that landscape where we're starting to be shaken by this church, this power, we get books about how it's fallen and how it's really about something completely different. And it's a reflection on our views of something like the Catholic Church at the time. You know, Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn is about a journalist returning to her hometown to uncover a series of murders and look at her own past. But, the murders themselves are a reflection of, we don't always make good decisions in our lives, especially when we're young. And so how do you face the bad decisions you made in your youth? How do you face those things that happen that you'd rather forget about? You can move away, you can get a new job, you can change your name, but you can't change what is part of your personal timeline. You can't change those things that happened in the past. Do you face them? Do you run from them? Or do you let them fester and become something that really you should discuss with a therapist? You know, so you get that kind of thing too, that sense of what happens when a successful person who left behind everything they knew has to go home. And in a psychological thriller like Sharp Objects, you get Flynn, writing just an incredible, incredible psychological work. Whereas other people writing narratives on that same subject end up as the leads in Hallmark Christmas movies or Sweet Home Alabama, where the plucky young executive lady ends up going back home and realizing she's still in love with her high school sweetheart. So you get the same story, and depending on whether or not this is something meant to be a comfy romance or if it's meant to be something that shocks and makes you confront your past, you've got two totally different vibes that you can have with the same story, with the same plot moments. You know, a psychological thriller on one side, and then a host of insert name here romance novels on the other. And there's a reason why romance and thrillers are the two most read fiction genres in Canada by far.
By
You
so
know,
far.
well, and according to BookNet Canada, which is an incredible resource for anybody who's interested in publishing in Canada, BookNet is fantastic. According to their 2023 review of book sales in Canada, only 28% of books sold in Canada were fiction, and the vast majority of those were romance and thriller. So there's something to this. There's something to this idea that you can tell vastly the same story, switch just a couple things. And on one side, you've got a psychological thriller or an action thriller, depending on the agency of the person who's in it, whether or not they're meant to feel powerless or whether or not they're meant to feel like they can, fight against it. And on the other side, you've got the potential for the other most prevalent genre, which is romance, which is allowing people to relive those moments that in their thoughts make life worth living.
So, Miss Bernal, are you switching Gagap to a thriller novel?
It's got some action thriller components. So Ginnan Gagap is still myth punk, so it is a sort of punky, subversive look at mythology and folklore, told in a more modern setting of 2017. So 2017 Vancouver. Oh man, it's almost 10 years ago. You're like, oh, no, it wasn't when I was writing the first book. It was 2017. No, it was 2012, but it's got some thriller pieces to it. It's got the release of certain pieces of information over time. I would say that it kind of hovers between psychological and action thriller, because I do a lot of battle scenes in my books. I do have, acts of violence. I do have, heroes going into battle and fighting against, all odds. But at the same time, Ginnungagap is filling in those pieces that Caleb Matheson never had. He now at the end of Book of Revels, he discovers who he truly is. He discovers, what his family actually is. And he realizes in that moment that this is opening up an entire can of worms. How did this happen? And so Ginnungagap is answering that questions of how all of this took place to create him in the first place. How it ended up that his father went the way he did and did things in the way he did, while at the same time having that underpinning drumbeat of battle that, like, this is it. We get to decide whether this is Ragnarok or whether this is going to be a vindication battle that is going to punish the guilty and save the innocent. So I definitely say there are both psychological and action components to Ginnungagap. Especially with Caleb, because he does receive a little hand up with his godly divine powers. He kind of gets a bit of an upgrade at the end of Book of Revels. And the fallout of that upgrade means that he's no longer tied to a sense of time. And so that is my one spoiler for Giningagap, that we get to see Caleb walking through places, and he's not seeing just one time. He's seeing multiple time at once, multiple periods of time at the same time. Like in chapter 1 of Giningagap, we go to a market town, actually a market town in North Yorkshire, a place that I love, a place that I want to go back to so bad. There's one specific market town that I absolutely adore. I've stayed there, I just love it. And he starts, like, he's walking through the market, and there's a dude selling vinyl records out of the back of a van. There's a guy making lattes out of the back of an old Volkswagen van. There's, people selling strawberries. There's this, there's that. And then all of a sudden there's, a woman in a dress from the Victorian era walking by. And then there's a medieval villager, getting his sheep to the market, into the market pen. And there's this and there's that. And he's off kilter all of a sudden because he's, like, it's like, uh-oh, what's happening? He's watching all of these things kind of silently unaware that he's just basically standing there staring at open space until, his daughter takes his hand and is like, Dad, hello, like, we can go home. It's okay. You don't have to do this. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's too soon after Book of Revels that, we're going out and about. And the other people with him kind of being like, okay, what's going on here? could somebody, and he's having a difficulty putting it in words. But I loved the idea of playing with that sense of time. And in a good thriller, especially one where there's so many things that have been left unsaid, and that he's still trying to discover the best way to go through a thriller with, love and murder, which is what the thriller portion of Giningagap is about. I just love it. It's a lot.
Yes, thank you, Miss Burnell, for sharing your talents to the world. Looking forward for Ginungagap. How about Agape Maki? Can you give a spoiler?
Okay, a spoiler for Agape Maki, I would say, is there are some people throughout history who have likened, a lot of mythology in Europe comes back from Indo-European roots. There's this sort of start from northern India that kind of sweeps in, and you see a lot of similarities in a lot of different mythology, pantheons and things. But there is this idea that, especially once we get into the Roman era with Mars, the god of war, that they saw Mars in the same way that various Germanic and Scandinavian populations and Norse populations saw Tyr, the god of war and justice. So Ares obviously is quite a negative god early on. When you see, him in Greek sources, a lot of that is because a lot of the extant texts that we do have were of Athenian origin. So of course they would hate the more Spartan and Thracian aligned Ares instead of their own warrior goddess Athena. So, you have to look at it from that lens. At the same time, Ares was this bang and clatter of battle. He's a fairly negative kind of god, negative but necessary. By the time we get into Rome and the Roman republics and things like that with Mars, he is the god of the everyman. He is the god of strength and courage. He is the god that women pray to when they've been wronged and they need protection, they need help. And so you have this morph of what Ares becomes. And for me, it was really fun to take a look at that and go, what if Ares is actually a good guy? And so Agape Maki is the story of how Ares goes from, angry divine youth in Greece with an overbearing abusive dad and a mom who's like, oh, everything's, Ares is the son of Zeus and Hera. Unlike his half siblings, he had a couple of other siblings as well, full siblings, but unlike his half siblings, who were far more popular with their father Zeus, Zeus was always bringing the bastards home. Everyone from Apollo and Artemis to Athena, the whole thing. Like, although some myths say that Athena was actually his first wife's child, but going on. And so you've got Ares, who is actually if you look at it, the legitimate heir, the legitimate son, and he's the one that's constantly being thrown down, thrown aside, bullied, thrown out, put in a pot until Gaia, the earth, cries out for help and needs Ares to come back because there's too many humans on her back. And so they need war again. All of these different things to Tyr, god of justice. And I loved the idea of playing with that. So Agapimaki is a story of how Aphrodite, the goddess of love, helps Ares through this initial anger and sort of that anger of youth and things like that, all the way through to making him into a good man, a strong man who's going to fight, who believes that conflict is a good thing, that you need to fight against things that you don't believe in, that kind of thing. So he's definitely got that conflict, he's got that warfare. It is a brutal thing, that masculine strength, but it's a good brutal, and so I really enjoyed playing with that. I think people are going to like how I did it, how I had Ares basically go from Zeus's hated puppet to a place of almost healing and strength in the Norse pantheon as Tyr. And that is and it connects with Ginnungagap in a very visceral and significant way, because Agapimaki is told in two timelines: one, the sort of Grecian timeline of things going on in the past, and two, 1863, which is the birth year of one Caleb Malthusson. So what we find out in Ginnungagap of what happened to create Caleb in the first place, we actually see firsthand from Ares and Aphrodite's perspective in Agapimaki. So it's a complete set.
Looking forward for that,
so
Miss
good.
Burnell.
It's gonna be so good.
Looking forward for that.
I'm so excited.
Again, thank you so much. So, Miss Burnell, to sum up what we're talking about, which thriller author do you think is the master of this genre?
I think when it comes to psychological thrillers, you have to go Gillian Flynn. So the author of Gone Girl, the author of Sharp Objects, Gillian Flynn is just so good at getting very psychological, with complex characters, incredible plot twists that you don't necessarily see coming. And to me, that's a talent. If you can tell a story where I don't necessarily know immediately upon reading 4 pages where it's going to go, then I'm a jaded editor at this point. I've worked acquisitions for almost 20 years. If you can pull one over on me and give me something that I didn't necessarily know where it was going, I'm like, oh, kudos, good for you. Like, here's applause. Like, oh my goodness. So I do have a softness in my heart for Stieg Larsson, of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I do believe that Stieg is a fantastic author as well. And so I would say Gillian Flynn and Stieg Larsson, all of those are more psychological thrillers. But those are who I would go with. And if you wanted an action thriller, I would definitely have to say, Tom Clancy's classic,
Yes.
but I really like Robert Ludlum, The Bourne Identity. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your word to the world and entertain us. And I hope more books to come, more movies to come to entertain us. So, Miss Burnell, what will be our topic next week?
Oh, next week.
Our Sapha Saturday.
Oh, Sapha Saturday. We are going to be taking a break from thrillers.
Yes.
And going into spooky season.
Spooky season, yes.
Spooky season. I would love to actually take a look at some different kinds of spook. Next week, I would love to be able to take people through more campy horror. So things like Harvest of Horror by Kes Bischoff. Things that seemed like they came from B movies from the 1950s through 70s, in literary form. There are some pretty fun things like Goosebumps back in the day for kids, and things that tell some pretty, I would almost say, not quite cozy horror, but they're horror, but they're very fun. They're like the
Fun.
Mummy movies with Brendan
Yes.
Fraser. They're fun.
Fun, people. So please tune in our Safa Saturday because become more bigger, better, and bolder. And we assure you, Miss Burnell is always there. Thank you for your
It's a good.
insights
Thank
and
you.
for your talents.
And thank you.
And people, thank you so much. And how's our music? I forgot. Please tune in tonight, people. Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Tonight, we're gonna talk about regional dishes in Italy, specifically in
Yum.
Veneto. So,
Ooh. Some
please,
of the best wine in Italy comes from
yeah,
that region. Prove me wrong. I mean,
Veneto.
Chianti is what it is, but Veneto, oh my gosh, you're getting some incredible bubbles. You're getting some incredible whites and reds. Like, oh,
Yes,
so
yes.
love it.
Italy is one of the leading producer of wine. I think they are right, number one or number two.
It
Second to
is, yeah.
France. So, Miss
Currently, I
Burnell,
believe Italy is still number one.
number one. Oh, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome. So, Miss Burnell, thank you
Number
for your
one.
time.
Yeah. Have a good day. See you, everybody, for Sapha Saturdays.